Good morning and welcome back to Storytime Classics Live, produced by Southwest Shakespeare Company. I am your host, Bo Heckman, and welcome back. It is the day for Rebecca, and with us, our guest reader, Amy. Amy, where are you? There you are. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. So, what's going on in the world of Rebecca today?
Well, the last time it was pretty much just Maxim talking and telling us exactly what happened. So we still have 6 or 8 chapters left. So I'm really interested to see what happens next. I feel like if Rebecca's ghost is here, it's going to she's going to make herself known. So
Scary.
yeah. It's kind of like, well, now that we know what happened, but now what happens with what we know? And Mrs. Danvers doesn't all know the story yet, so I can't wait to see what she does. And the second Mrs. Winters is kind of growing a spine, which is nice. I think she's starting to stand up for herself a little bit, which I like seeing.
Taking charge.
Yeah, but we're almost done. Look at this. There's only 80 pages left.
Oh, big cheer.
I know.
Yeah.
What are we going to do?
Right here, coming up here. Before I turn things over, I'd like to say it is Arizona Gives Day. Please consider making a donation to Southwest Shakespeare Company, and you can do so. There's some information here. Arizona Gives Day is here. Please consider giving to Southwest Shakespeare Company. Without your donations, we really cannot produce and employ all of the wonderful people and talented people like Amy, like maybe this person, we'll see. All of the people that go into making up what Southwest Shakespeare Company is, and that is a great Shakespearean community and a great professional theater. And we just really ask you to consider making a donation to Southwest Shakespeare Company. And to get you excited about all of that, we have our virtual production of Two Gentlemen of Verona preparing tonight at 7 p.m. That's Arizona time. I guess I should consider that. 7 p.m. And it'll be on our Facebook and YouTube channels. So don't miss that. That's going to be really great. Of course it is. So do the proper spelling of Shakespeare, please. Do the proper spelling of Shakespeare. So yes, the website is correct, except please spell Shakespeare correctly. That's your one challenge there.
I didn't know there'd be a test. My goodness.
But definitely check out our production of Two Gentlemen of Verona as a fundraiser for Southwest Shakespeare Company tonight on our Facebook and YouTube pages. It really is a charming, beautiful production, and so check it out. You'll be glad you did, and please consider making a donation to Southwest Shakespeare Company. All right, enough of that pitch there, and I will turn things over to Amy.
Yes.
To continue with our story of Rebecca.
Yes, Rebecca. Yes. So, we just heard a bunch from Maxim, and now we get to see what happens. Let us dive in. I want to say good morning to Catherine James. Welcome back. Happy Tuesday. And for those of you who are just joining us, hopefully you've caught up with everything. And if you haven't, you can go back and see all of them. They're all online. But here's the version we're using. Ta-da! And we are on chapter 22. So we'll take off my cute little coffee mug bookmark and let's go. So we just found out and heard the whole story. That evening, when Frith brought in the local paper, there were great headlines right across the top of the page. He brought the paper and laid it down on the table. Maxim was not there. He had gone up early to change for dinner. Frith stood a moment, waiting for me to say something, and it seemed to me stupid and insulting to ignore a matter that must mean so much to everyone in this house. "This is a dreadful thing, Frith," I said. "Yes, madam, we are all most distressed outside," he said. "It's so sad for Mr. De Winter," I said, "having to go through it all again." "Yes, madam, very sad. Such a shocking experience, madam, having to identify the second body, having seen the first. I suppose there is no doubt, then, that the remains of the boats are genuinely those of the late Mrs. De Winter? I'm afraid not, Frith. No doubt at all. It seems so odd to us, madam, that she should have let herself be trapped like that in the cabin. She was so experienced in a boat. Yes, Frith, that's what we all feel, but accidents will happen. And now it's happened, I don't suppose any of us will ever know. I suppose not, madam. But it is a great shock all the same. We are most distressed about it outside, and coming suddenly, just after the party, it doesn't seem right somehow, does it? No, Frith. It seems there is to be an inquest, madam? Yes, a formality, you know. Of course, madam. I wonder if any of us will be required to give evidence. I don't think so. I shall be only too pleased to do anything that might help the family. Mr. De Winter knows that. Yes, Frith, I'm sure he does. I told them outside not to discuss the matter, but it's very difficult to keep an eye on them, especially the girls. I can deal with Robert, of course. I'm afraid the news has been a great shock to Mrs. Danvers. Yes, Frith, I rather expect it would. She went up to her room straight after lunch and has not come down again. Alice took her a cup of tea and the paper a few minutes ago. She said Mrs. Danvers looked very ill indeed. It would be better, really, if she stayed where she is, I said. It's no use her getting up and seeing to things if she is ill. Perhaps Alice would tell her that. I can very well manage the ordering, the cook and I between us. Yes, madam. I don't think she's physically ill, madam. It's just the shock of Mrs. De Winter being found. She was very devoted to Mrs. De Winter. Yes, I said. Yes, I know. Frith went out of the room after that, and I glanced quickly at the paper before Maxim came down. There was a great column all about the front page and an awful blurred photograph of Maxim that must have been taken at least 15 years ago. It was dreadful, seeing it there on the front page staring at me, and the little line about myself at the bottom, saying who Maxim had married as his second wife, and how he had just given the fancy dress ball at Manderley. It sounded so crude and cast in the dark print of the newspaper. Rebecca, whom they've described as beautiful, talented, and loved by all who knew her, having been drowned a year ago, and then Maxim marrying again the following spring, bringing his bride straight to Manderley, so it said, and giving the big fancy dress ball in her honor. And then the following morning, the body of his first wife being found, trapped in the cabin of her sailing boat at the bottom of the bay. It was true, of course, though sprinkled with little inaccuracies that added to the story, making it strong meat for the hundreds of readers who wanted value for their pennies. Maxim sounded vile in it, a sort of satyr, bringing back his young bride, as it described me, to Manderley, and giving the dance, as though we wanted to display ourselves before the world. I hid the paper under the cushion of the chair so that Maxim would not see it, but I could not keep the morning editions from him. The story was in our London papers, too. There was a picture of Manderley, and the story underneath. Manderley was news, and so was Maxim. They talked about him as Max de Winter. It sounded racy and horrible. Each paper made great play of the fact that Rebecca's body had been found the day after the fancy dress ball, as though there was something deliberate about it. Both papers used the same word, ironic. Yes, I suppose it was ironic, and it made a good story. I watched Maxim at the breakfast table, getting whiter and whiter as he read the papers, one after the other, and then the local one as well. He did not say anything. He just looked across at me, and I stretched out my hand to him. Damn them, he whispered. Damn them, damn them. I thought of all the things they could say if they knew the truth. Not one column, but 5 or 6. Placards in London. Newsboys shouting in the streets outside the underground stations. That frightful word of 6 letters in the middle of the placard, black and large. Frank came up after breakfast. He looked pale and tired, as though he had not slept. I've told the exchange to put all calls from Manderley through to the office, he said to Maxim. It doesn't matter who it is. If reporters ring up, I can deal with them, and anyone else, too. I don't want either of you to be worried at all. We've had several calls already from locals. I gave the same answer to each. Mr. and Mrs. De Winter were grateful for all the sympathetic inquiries, and they hoped their friends would understand that they were not receiving calls during the next few days. Mrs. Lacey rang up about 8:30, wanted to come over at once. "Oh, my God," began Maxim. "It's all right. I prevented her. I told her quite truthfully that I did not think she would do any good by coming over, that you did not want to see anyone but Mrs. De Winter. She wanted to know when they were holding the inquest, but I told her it had not been settled. I don't know what we can stop her from coming to that if she finds it in the papers." "Those blasted reporters," said Maxim. "I know," said Frank. "We all want to wring their necks, but you've got to see it from their point of view. It's their bread and butter. They've got to do the job for their paper. If they don't get a story, the editor probably sacks them. If the editor does not produce a sellable edition, the proprietor sacks him. And if the paper doesn't sell, the proprietor loses all his money. You won't have to see them or speak to them, Maxim. I'm going to do all that for you. All you have to concentrate on is your statement at the inquest." "I know what to say," said Maxim. "Of course you do. But don't forget old Horridge is the coroner. He's a sticky sort of chap, goes into details that are quite irrelevant, just to show the jury how thorough he is at his job. You must not let him rattle you." "Why the devil should I be rattled? I have nothing to be rattled about." "Of course not. But I've attended these coroners' inquests before, and it is so easy to get nervy and irritable. You don't want to put the fellows back up." "Frank's right," I said. "I know just what he means. The swifter and smoother the whole thing goes, the easier it will be for everyone. Then, once the wretched thing is over, we shall forget all about it, and so will everyone else. Won't they, Frank?" "Yes, of course," said Frank. I still avoided his eye, but I was more convinced than ever that he knew the truth. He had always known it, from the very first. I remembered the first time I met him, that first day of mine at Manderley, when he and Beatrice and Giles had all been at lunch, and Beatrice had been tactless about Maxim's health. I remember Frank, his quiet turning of the subject, the way he'd come to Maxim's aid in his quiet, unobtrusive manner if there was any question of difficulty. That strange reluctance of his to talk about Rebecca, his stiff, funny, pompous way of making conversation whenever we had approached anything like intimacy, I understood it all. Frank knew, but Maxim did not know that he knew. And we all stood there, looking at one another, keeping these little barriers between us. We were not bothered with the telephone again. All the calls were put through to the office. It was just a question of waiting now, waiting until the Tuesday. I saw nothing of Mrs. Danvers. The menu was sent through as usual, and I did not change it. I asked little Clarice about her. She said she was going about her work as usual, but she was not speaking to anybody. She had all her meals alone in her sitting room. Clarice was wide-eyed, evidently curious, but she did not ask me any questions, and I was not going to discuss it with her. No doubt they talked of nothing else out in the kitchen, and on the estate too, in the lodge, on the farms. I supposed all Carith was full of it. We stayed in Manderley, in the gardens close to house. We did not even walk in the woods. The weather had not broken yet. It was still hot, oppressive. The air was full of thunder, and there was rain behind the white, dull sky, but it did not fall. I could feel it and smell it pent up there behind the clouds. The inquest was to be on the Tuesday afternoon at 2:00. We had lunch at 1:45. Frank came. Thank heaven Beatrice had telephoned that she would not get over. The boy Roger had arrived home with measles, and they were all quarantined. I could not help blessing the measles. I don't think Maxim could have borne it with Beatrice sitting here, staying in the house, sincere, anxious, and affectionate, but asking questions all the time, forever asking questions. Lunch was a hurried, nervous meal. We none of us talked very much. I had that nagging pain again. I did not want anything to eat. I could not swallow. It was a relief when the farce of the meal was over, and I heard Maxim go out into the drive and start at the car. The sound of the engine steadied me. It meant we all had to go. We all had to be doing something, not just sitting at Manderley. Frank followed us in his own car. I had my hand on Maxim's knee all the way as he drove. He seemed quite calm, not nervous in any way. It was like going with someone to a nursing home, someone who was to have an operation, and not knowing what would happen. My heart was beating in a funny, jerky way, and all the time that little nagging pain beneath my heart. The inquest was to be held at Leon, the market town 6 miles the other side of Carith. We had to park the car in the big cobbled square by the marketplace. Dr. Phillips's car was there already, and also Colonel Julian's. Other cars, too. I saw a passerby stare curiously at Maxim and then nudge her companion's arm. I think I shall stay here, I said. I don't think I'll come in with you after all. I did not want you to come, said Maxim. I was already get it from the first. You'd much better have stayed at Manderley. No, I'll be all right here, sitting in the car. Frank came and looked in the window. Isn't Mrs. De Winter coming? He said. No, said Maxim. She wants to stay in the car. I think she's right, said Frank. There's no earthly reason why she should be present at all. We shan't be long. It's all right, I said. I'll keep a seat for you, said Frank, in case you should change your mind. They went off together and left me sitting there. It was early closing day. The shops looked drab and dull. There were not many people about. Leon was not much of a holiday center anyway. It was too far inland. I sat looking at the silent shops. The minutes went by. I wondered what they were doing, the coroner, Frank, Maxim, Colonel Julian. I got out of the car and began walking up and down the market square. I went and looked in a shop window. Then I walked up and down again. I saw a policeman watching me curiously. I turned up a side street to avoid him. Somehow, in spite of myself, I found I was coming to the building where the inquest was being held. There had been a little publicity about the actual time, and because of this, there was no crowd waiting as I had feared and expected. The place seemed deserted. I went up steps and stood just outside the door. A policeman appeared from nowhere. Do you want anything? He said. No, I said. No. You can't wait here, he said. I'm sorry, I said. I went back towards the steps down into the street. Excuse me, madam, aren't you Mrs. De Winter? Yes, I said. Well, of course, that's different. You can wait here if you'd like, he said. Would you like to take a seat just inside this room? Thank you, I said. He showed me into a little bare room with a desk in it. It was like a waiting room at a station. I sat there with my hands on my lap. 5 minutes passed. Nothing happened. It was worse than being outside and sitting in the car. I got up and went into the passage. The policeman was still standing there. How long will they be? I'll go in and inquire if you'd like, he said. He disappeared along the passage. In a moment, he came back again. I don't think they will be very much longer, he said. Mr. De Winter was just giving his evidence. Captain Serrell and the driver and Dr. Phillips have already given theirs. There's only one more to speak, Mr. Tabb, the boat builder from Carith. Then it's nearly over, I said. I expect so, madam. Then he said in a sudden thought, would you like to hear the remaining evidence? There's a seat there just inside the door. If you slip in now, nobody will notice you. Yes, I said. Yes, I think I will. It was nearly over. Maxim had finished giving his evidence. I did not mind hearing the rest. It was Maxim I had not wanted to hear. I had been so nervous of listening to his evidence. That was why I had not gotten in with him and Frank in the first place. But now it did not matter. His part was over. I followed the policeman and he opened the door at the end of the passage. I slipped in. I sat down just by the door. I kept my head low so I did not have to look at anybody. The room was smaller than I had imagined, rather hot and stuffy. I had pictured a great bare room with benches like a church. Maxim and Frank were sitting down at the other end. The coroner was a thin, elderly man. There were people there I did not know. I glanced at them out of the tail of my eye. My heart gave a jump suddenly as I recognized Mrs. Danvers. She was sitting right at the back, and Fauvel was right beside her. Jack Fauvel, Rebecca's cousin. He was leaning forward, his chin in his hands, his eyes fixed on the coroner, Mr. Horridge. I had not expected him to be there. I wondered if Maxim had seen him. James Tabb, the boat builder, was standing up now, and the coroner was asking him a question. Yes, sir, answered Tabb. I converted Mrs. De Winter's little boat. She was a French fishing boat originally, and Mrs. De Winter bought her for a next to nothing over in Brittany and had her shipped over. She gave me the job of converting her and doing her up like a little yacht. Was the boat in a fit state to put out to sea? Said the coroner. She was when I fitted her out in April of last year, said Tab. Mrs. De Winter laid her up as usual at my yard in October, and then in March I had word from her to fit it up as usual, which I did. That would be Mrs. De Winter's 4th season with the boat since I had the conversion job for her. Had the boat ever been known to capsize before? Asked the coroner. No, sir. I should soon have heard it from Mrs. De Winter had there been any question of it. She was delighted with the boat in every way, according to what she said to me. I suppose care was needed to handle the boat, said the coroner. Well, sir, everybody has to have their wits about them when they go sailing boats. I won't deny it. But Mrs. De Winter's boat wasn't one of those cranky little crafts that you can't leave for a moment, like some of the boats you see in Carith. She was about seaworthy boat and could stand a lot of wind. Mrs. De Winter had sailed her in worse weather than she ever found that night. Why, it was only blowing in fits and starts at the time. That's what I've said all along. I couldn't understand Mrs. De Winter's boat getting lost on a night like that. But surely, if Mrs. De Winter went below for a coat, as is supposed, and a sudden puff of wind has to come up from that land-head, it would be enough to capsize the boat, asked the coroner. James Tabb shook his head. No, he said stubbornly. I don't see that it would. Well, I'm afraid that is what must have happened, said the coroner. I don't think Mr. De Winter or any of us suggests that your workmanship was to blame for the accident at all. You fitted the boat out at the beginning of the season. You reported her sound and seaworthy, and that's all I want to know. Unfortunately, the late Mrs. De Winter relaxed her watchfulness for a moment, and she lost her life, the boat sinking with her aboard. Such accidents have happened before. I repeat again, we are not blaming you. Excuse me, sir, said the boat builder, but there is a little bit more to it than that, and if you would allow me, I would like to make a further statement. Very well, go on, said the coroner. It's like this, sir. After the accident last year, a lot of people in Carith made unpleasantness about my work. Some said I had let Mrs. De Winter start the season in a leaky, rotten boat. I lost 2 or 3 orders because of it. It was very unfair, but the boat had sunk, and there was nothing I could say to clear myself. Then that steamer went ashore, as we all know, and Mrs. De Winter's little boat was found and brought to the surface. Captain Serrell himself gave me permission yesterday to go and look at her, and I did. I wanted to satisfy myself that the work I had put into her was sound, in spite of the fact that she had been waterlogged for 12 months or more. That's very natural, said the coroner. I hope you were satisfied. Yes, sir, I was. There was nothing wrong with that boat as regards to the work I did to her. I examined every corner of her there on the lighter up on the pill where Captain Serrell had put her. She had sunk on sandy bottom. I asked the diver about that, and he told me so. She had not touched the ridge at all. The ridge was clear 5 feet away. She was lying on sand, and there wasn't the mark of a rock on her. He paused, and the coroner looked at him expectantly. Well, is that all you want to say? No, sir, said Tabb emphatically. It is not. What I want to know is this. Who drove the holes into her planking? Rocks didn't do it. The nearest rock was 5 feet away. Besides, they weren't the sort of marks made by a rock. They were holes. Holes done with a spike. I did not look at him. I was looking at the floor. There was an oilcloth laid on the boards. Green oilcloth. I looked at that. I wondered why the coroner did not say something. Why did the pause last so long? When he spoke at last, his voice sounded rather far away. What do you mean? He said. What sort of holes? There were 3 of them altogether, said the boat builder. 1 right forward by her chain locker on her starboarding planking below the waterline. The other 2 close together amidships underneath her floorboards in the bottom. The ballast had been shifted too. It was lying loose, and that's not all. The seacocks had been turned on. Seacocks? What are they? The fitting that plugs the pipes leading from a wash basin or lavatory, sir. Mrs. De Winter had a little place fitted up the right aft, and there was a sink forward where the washing up was done. There was a seacock there, and another in the lavatory. These are always kept tight closed when you're underway, otherwise the water would flow in. When I examined the boat yesterday, both seacocks were turned full on. It was hot, much too hot. Why didn't they open a window? We should be suffocated if we sat here with the air like this, and there were so many people, all breathing the same air. So many people. With those holes in her planking, sir, and the sea cocks not closed, it wouldn't take long for a small boat like her to sink. Not much more than 10 minutes, I would say. Those holes weren't there when the boat left my yard. I was proud of my work, and so was Mrs. De Winter. In my opinion, sir, that boat never capsized at all. She was deliberately scuttled. I must try to get out of the door. I must try and go back to the waiting room again. There was no air left in this place, and the person next to me was pressing close. Someone in front of me was standing up, and they were talking too. They were all talking. I did not know what was happening. I couldn't see anything. It was hot, so very hot. The coroner was asking everybody to be silent, and then he'd said something about Mr. De Winter. I could not see. That woman's hat in front of me. Maxim is standing up now. I could not look at him. I must not look at him. I felt like this once before. When was it? Oh, I don't know. I don't remember. Oh, yes, with Mrs. Danvers. That time Mrs. Danvers stood by me next to the window. Mrs. Danvers was in this place now, listening to the coroner. Maxim was standing up over there. The heat was coming up at me from the floor, rising in slow waves. It reached my hands, wet and slippery. It touched my cheek, my chin, my face. Mr. De Winter, you heard the statement from James Tabb, who had the care of Mrs. De Winter's boat. Do you know anything of these holes driving into... Excuse me. Do you know anything of these holes driven into the planking? Nothing whatsoever. Can you think of any reason why they should be there? No, of course not. This is the first time you have heard them mentioned? Yes. It is a shock to you, of course. It was shock enough to learn that I made a mistake in identification over 12 months ago, and now I learn that my late wife was not only drowned in the cabin of her boat, but that holes were bored in the boat with the deliberate intent of letting in the water so that the boat would sink. Does it surprise you that I should be shocked? No, Maxim, no, you will put his back up. You heard what Frank said. You must not put his back up. Not that voice, not that angry voice, Maxim. He won't understand. Please, darling, please. Oh, God, don't let Maxim lose his temper. Don't let him lose his temper. Mr. De Winter, I want you to believe that we all feel very deeply for you in this matter. No doubt you have suffered a shock, a very severe shock, in learning that your late wife was drowned in her own cabin and not at sea as you supposed. And I am inquiring into the matter for you. I want, for your sake, to find out exactly how and why she died. I don't conduct this inquiry for my own amusement. That's rather obvious, isn't it? I hope that it is. James Tabb has just told us that the boat which contains the remains of the late Mrs. De Winter had 3 holes hammered through her bottom, and that the sea cocks were open. Do you doubt his statement? Of course not. He's a boat builder. He knows what he's talking about. Who looked after Mrs. De Winter's boat? She looked after it herself. She employed no hand. No, nobody at all. The boat was moored in the private harbor belonging to Manderley. Yes. Any stranger who tried to tamper with the boat would be seen, and there is no access to the harbor by public footpath? No, none at all. The harbor is quiet, is it not, and surrounded by trees? Yes. A trespasser might not be noticed. Possibly not. Yet James Tabb has told us, and we have no reason to disbelieve him, that a boat with these holes drilled in her bottom and the sea cocks open could not float for more than 10 or 15 minutes. Quite. Therefore, we can put aside the idea that the boat was tampered with maliciously before Mrs. De Winter went for her evening sail. Had that been the case, the boat would have sunk in her moorings. No doubt. Therefore, we must assume that whoever took the boat out that night drove in the planking and opened the sea cocks. I suppose so. You have told us already that the door of the cabin was shut, the portholes closed, and your wife's remains were on the floor. This is in your statement, and in Dr. Phillips's, and in Captain Sarrow's. Yes. And now, added to this information that a spike was driven through the bottom and the seacocks were open. Does this not strike you, Mr. De Winter, as being very strange? Certainly. You have no suggestion to make? No, none at all. Mr. De Winter, as painful as it may be, it is my duty to ask you a very personal question. Yes? Were relations between you and the late Mrs. De Winter perfectly happy? They had to come, of course, these black spots in front of my eyes, dancing, flickering, stabbing the hazy air, and it was hot, so hot, with all these people, all those faces, and no open window. The door, from being near to me, was farther away than I had thought, and all the time the ground coming up to meet me. And then, out of the queer mist around, Maxim's voice clear and strong. Will someone take my wife outside? She's going to faint. Yes, Catherine, I'm going to have some water. Well, yes, exactly. One guy wants validation that his job is a good job, and suddenly the doors open, or the floodgates open, or seacocks open, I guess would be the right way. Yes. You never know what's going to happen. I was sitting in the little room again, and the room like a waiting room at the station. The policeman was there, bending over me, giving me a glass of water, and someone's hand was on my arm, Frank's hand. I sat quite still, the floor, the walls, the figures of Frank and the policeman taking solid shape before me. I'm so sorry, I said, such a stupid thing to do. It was so hot in that room, so very hot. It gets very airless in there, said the policeman. There's been complaints about it often, but nothing's ever done. We've had ladies fainting in there before. Are you feeling better, Mrs. De Winter? Said Frank. Yes, much better. I shall be all right again. Don't wait for me. I'm going to take you back to Manderley. No. Yes, Maxim has asked me to do. No, you ought to stay with him. Maxim told me to take you back to Manderley. He put his arm through mine and helped me to get up. Can you walk as far as the car, or shall I bring it round? I can walk. But I'd much rather stay. I want to wait for Maxim. Maxim may be a long time. Why did he say that? What did he mean? Why didn't he look at me? He took my arm and walked with me along the passage to the door and down the steps into the street. Maxim may be a long time. We did not speak. We came to the little Morris car belonging to Frank. He opened the door and helped me in. Then he got in himself and started up the engine. We drove away from the cobbled marketplace, through the empty town, and out onto the road to Carriff. Why will they be a long time? What are they going to do? They may have to go over the evidence again. Frank looked straight in front of him along the hard white road. They've had all the evidence, I said. There's nothing more anyone can say. You never know, said Frank. The coroner may put his questions in a different way. Tab has altered the whole business. The coroner will have to approach it now from another angle. What angle? How do you mean? You heard the evidence. You heard what Tab said about the boat. They won't believe it is an accident anymore. That's absurd, Frank. That's ridiculous. They should not listen to Tab. How can he tell after all these months how holes came to be in a boat? What are they trying to prove? I don't know. That coroner will go on and on, harping at Maxim, making him lose his temper, making him say things he doesn't mean. He will ask question after question, Frank, and Maxim won't stand it. I know he won't stand it. Frank did not answer. He was driving very fast. For the first time that I had known him, he was at a loss for the usual conventional phrase. That meant he was worried, very worried. And usually he was slow, careful driver, stopping dead at every crossroads, peering right and left, blowing his horn at every bend in the road. That man was there, I said. That man who came once at Manderley to see Mrs. Danvers? You mean Flavel? Said Frank. Yes, I saw him. He was sitting there with Mrs. Danvers. Yes, I know. Why was he there? What right had he to go to the inquest? He was her cousin. It's not that he and Mrs. Danvers should sit there, listening to that evidence. It's not right. I don't trust them, Frank. No. They might do something. They might make mischief. Again, Frank did not answer. I realized that his loyalty to Maxim was such that he would not let himself be drawn into a discussion, even with me. He did not know how much I knew. Nor could I tell for certainty how much he knew. We were allies. We traveled the same road, but we could not look at one another. Neither of us dared risk a confession. We were turning in now at the lodge gates and down the long, twisting, narrow drive to the house. I noticed for the first time how the hydrangeas were coming into bloom, their blue heads thrusting themselves from the green foliage behind. For all their beauty, there was something somber about them, funereal. They were like the wreaths, stiff and artificial, that you see beneath glass cases in a foreign churchyard. There they were, all the way up the drive on either side of us, blue, monotonous, like spectators lined up on a street to watch us pass. We came to the house at last and rounded the great sweep before the steps. Will you be all right now? Said Frank. You can lie down, can't you? Yes, I said, yes, perhaps. I shall go back to Lanyon. Maxim may want me. He did not say anything more. He got quickly back into the car again and drove away. Maxim might want him. Why did he say Maxim might want him? Perhaps the coroner was going to question Frank as well. Ask him about that evening over 12 months ago when Maxim had dined with Frank. He would want to know the exact time that Maxim left his house. He would want to know if anybody saw Maxim when he returned to the house, whether the servants knew that he was there, whether anybody could prove that Maxim went straight up to bed and undressed. Mrs. Danvers might be questioned. They might ask Mrs. Danvers to give evidence, and Maxim, beginning to lose his temper, beginning to go white. I went into the hall, went upstairs to my room and lay down upon my bed, even as Frank had suggested. I put my hands over my eyes. I kept seeing that room and all those faces, the lined, painstaking, aggravated face of the coroner, the gold pince-nez on his nose. I don't conduct this inquiry for my own amusement, a slow, careful mind, easily offended. What were they all saying now? What was happening? Suppose in a little while Frank came back to Manderley, alone. I did not know what happened. I did not know what people did. I remembered pictures of men in the papers leaving places like that and being taken away. Suppose Maxim was taken away. They would not let me go to him. They would not let me see him. I should have to stay here at Manderley day after day, night after night, waiting as I was waiting now. People like Colonel Julian being kind, people saying, you must not be alone. You must come to us. The telephone, the newspapers, telephone again. No, Mrs. De Winter can't see anyone. Mrs. De Winter has no story to give the County Chronicle. And another day, and another day. Weeks would be blurred and non-existent. Frank at last taking me to see Maxim. He would look thin, queer, like people in a hospital. Older women had been through this. Women I had read about in papers. They sent letters to the Home Secretary, and it was not any good. The Home Secretary always said that justice must take its course. Friends sent petitions too. Everybody signed them, but the Home Secretary could never do anything. And the ordinary people who read about it in the paper said, why should the fellow get off? He murdered his wife, didn't he? What about the poor murdered wife? This sentimental business about abolishing the death penalty simply encourages crime. This fellow ought to have thought about that before he killed his wife. It's too late now. He'll have to hang for it like every other murderer. And serve him right too. Let it be a warning to others. I remembered seeing a picture on the back of a paper once of a little crowd collecting outside a prison gate. And just after 9 o'clock, a policeman came and pinned a notice on the gate for the people to read. A notice said something about the sentence being carried out. Sentence of death was carried out this morning at 9 o'clock. The governor, the prison doctor, and the sheriff of the duty were present. Hanging was quick. Hanging did not hurt. It broke your neck at once. No, it did not. Someone said it did not always work. Someone who had known the governor of a prison. They put that bag over your head and you stand on the little platform and then the door gives way beneath you. It takes exactly 3 minutes to go from the cell to the moment you are hanged. No, 50 seconds, someone said? No, that's absurd. It should not be 50 seconds. There's a little flight of steps down to the side of the shed, down to the pit. The doctor goes down there to look. They die instantly. No, they don't, because the body moves for some time. The neck is not always broken. Yes, but even so, they don't feel anything. Someone said they did. Someone who had a brother who was a prison doctor said it was not generally known because it would be such a scandal, but they did not always die at once. Their eyes were open. They stay open for quite a long time. God, don't let me go on thinking about this. Let me think about something else, anything else, about other things, about Mrs. Van Hopper in America. She must be staying with her daughter now. They have that house in Long Island in the summer. I expect they played lots of bridge. They went to the races. Mrs. Van Hopper was fond of the races. And I wondered if she still wears that little yellow hat. It was too small for her, much too small on that big face. Mrs. Van Hopper sitting about in the garden of that house on Long Island with novels and magazines and papers on her lap. Mrs. Van Hopper putting up her lorgnette and calling to her daughter, "Look at this, Helen. They say Maxim de Winter murdered his first wife. I always did think there was something peculiar about him. I warned that fool girl she was making a mistake, but she wouldn't listen to me. Well, she's cooked her goose now, all right. I suppose they'll make her a big offer to go into the pictures." Something was touching my hand. It was Jasper, thrusting his cold, damp nose in my hands. He had followed me up from the hall. Why did dogs make one want to cry? There was something so quiet and hopeless about their sympathy. Jasper, knowing something was wrong, as dogs always do. Trunks being packed, cars being brought to the door, dogs standing with drooping tails, dejected eyes, wandering back to their baskets in the hall when the sound of the car dies away. I must have fallen asleep because I woke suddenly with a start and heard that first crack of thunder in the air. I sat up. The clock said 5. I got up and went to the window. There was not a breath of wind. The leaves hung listlessly in the trees, waiting. The sky was slaty gray. The jagged light lit the sky, another rumble in the distance. No rain fell. I went out in the corridor and listened. I could not hear anything. I went to the head of the stairs, and there was no sign of anybody. The hall was dark because of the menace of thunder overhead. I went down and stood in the terrace. There was another burst of thunder. One spot of rain fell on my head. No more. It was very dark. I could see the sea beyond the dip in the valley like a black lake. Another spot fell on my hand, and another crack of thunder came. One of the housemaids began shutting windows in the rooms upstairs. Robert appeared and shut the windows of the drawing room behind me. "The gentlemen are not back yet, are they, Robert?" I asked. "No, madam, not yet." "I thought you were with them, madam." No, I've been back some time." "Will you have tea, madam?" No, I'll wait." "It looks as though the weather is going to break at last, madam." "Yes." No rain fell. Nothing since those 2 drops on my hand. I went back and sat in the library. At 5:30, Robert came into the room. "The car has just driven up in the door now, madam," he said. "Which car?" I said. "Mr. De Winter's car, madam," he said. "Is Mr. De Winter driving himself?" "Yes, madam." I tried to get up, but my legs were things of straw. They would not bear me. I stood leaning against the sofa. My throat was very dry. After a minute, Maxim came into the room. He stood just inside the door. He looked very tired, old. There were lines at the corner of his mouth I had not noticed before. "It's all over," he said. I waited. Still, I could not speak or move towards him. "Suicide," he said, "without sufficient evidence to show the state of mind of the deceased. They were all at sea, of course. They did not know what they were doing." I sat on the sofa. "Suicide," I said. "But the motive? Where was the motive?" "God knows. They did not seem to think a motive was necessary. Old Horridge peering at me, wanting to know if Rebecca had any money troubles. Money troubles, God in heaven. He went and stood by the window, looking out at the green lawns. "It's going to rain," he said. "Thank God it's going to rain at last." "What happened?" I said. "What did the coroner say? Where have you been all this time?" He went over and over the same ground again, said Maxim. Little details about the boat that no one cared a damn. Were the seacocks hard to turn on? Where exactly was the first hole in relation to the second? What was a ballast? What effect of the stability of the boat would have on the shifting of the ballast have? Could a woman do this unaided? Did the cabin door shut firmly? What pressure water was necessary to burst open the door? I thought I should go mad. I kept my temper, though. Seeing you there by the door made me remember what I had to do. If you had not fainted like that, I should never have done it. Brought me up with a jerk. I knew exactly what I was going to say. I faced Horridge all the time. I never took my eyes off his thin, persnickety little face. I shall remember that face to my dying day. I'm tired, darling. So tired I can't see or hear or feel anything. He sat down on the window seat. He leant forward, his head in his hands. I went and sat beside him. In a few minutes, Frith came in, followed by Robert, carrying the table for tea. The solemn ritual went forward as it always did, day after day, the leaves of the table pulled out, the legs adjusted, the laying of the snowy cloth, the putting down of the silver teapot and the kettle with a little flame beneath. Scones, sandwiches, 3 different sorts of cake. Jasper sat close to the table, his tail thumping now and again upon the floor, his eyes fixed expectantly on me. It's funny, I thought, how the routine of life goes on, whatever happens. We do the same things, go through the little performance of eating, sleeping, washing. No crisis can break through the crust of habit. I poured out Maxim's tea. I took it to him in the window seat, gave him a scone, and buttered one for myself. Where's Frank? I asked. He had to go and see the vicar. I would have gone too, but I wanted to come straight to you. I kept thinking of you, waiting here, all by yourself, not knowing what was going to happen. Why the vicar? I said. Something has to happen this evening. Something at the church. I stared at him blankly, and then I understood. They were going to bury Rebecca. They were going to bring Rebecca back from the mortuary. It's fixed for 6:30. No one knows but Frank and Colonel Julian and the vicar and myself. There won't be anyone hanging about. This was arranged yesterday. The verdict doesn't make any difference. What time must you go? I'm meeting them there at the church at 6:25. I did not say anything. I went on drinking my tea. Max put his sandwich down untasted. It's very hot, isn't it? He said. It's the storm, I said. It won't break. Only little spots at a time. It's there in the air. It won't break. It was thundering when I left Lanyon. The sky was like ink over my head. Why, in the name of God, doesn't it rain? The birds were hushed in the trees. It was still very dark. I wish you did not have to go out again, I said. He did not answer. He looked tired, so deathly tired. We'll talk over things this evening when I get back, he said presently. We've got so much to do together, haven't we? We've got to begin all over again. I've been the worst sort of husband for you. No, I said, no. We'll start again once this thing is behind us. We can do it, you and I. It's not like being alone. The past can't hurt us if we are together. You'll have children, too. After a while, he glanced at his watch. It's 6:10, he said. I shall have to be going. It won't take long, not more than half an hour. We've got to go down to the crypt. I held his hand. I'll come with you. I shan't mind. Let me come with you. No, I do not want you to come. Then he went out of the room. I heard the sound of the car starting up the drive. Presently the sound died away, and I knew he had gone. Robert came to clear away the tea, and it was like any other day. The routine was unchanged. I wondered if it had been so had Maxim not come back from Lanyard. I wonder if Robert would have stood there, that wooden expression on his young sheep's face, brushing the crumbs from the snowy white cloth, picking up the table, carrying it from the room. It seemed very quiet in the library when he had gone. I began to think of them down at the church, going through that door and down the flight of stairs to the crypt. I had never been there. I had only seen the door. I wondered what the crypt was like. There were coffins standing there, Maxim's father and mother. I wondered what would happen to the coffin if that other woman who had been put there by mistake. I wondered who she was, poor unclaimed soul, washed up by the wind and tide. Now another coffin would stand there. Rebecca would lie in the crypt as well. Was the vicar reading the burial service there, with Maxim and Frank and Colonel Julian standing by his side? Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It seemed to me that Rebecca had no reality anymore. She had crumbled away when they had found her in the cabin door. It was not Rebecca who was lying in the coffin in the crypt. It was dust. Only dust. Just after 7, rain began to fall. Gently at first, a light pattering in the trees, and so thin I could not see it. Then louder and faster, a driving torrent falling slantways from the slate sky like water from a sluice. I left the windows open wide. I stood in front of them and breathed the cold, clean air. The rain splashed into my face and on my hands. I could not see beyond the lawns. The falling rain came thick and fast. I heard it sputtering in the gutter pipes above the window and splashing on the stones of the terrace. There was no more thunder. The rain smelt of moss and earth and of the black bark of trees. I did not hear Frith come to the door. I was standing by the window watching the rain, and I did not see him until he was beside me. "Excuse me, madam," he said. "Do you know if Mr. De Winter will be long?" "No," I said, "not very long." "There's a gentleman here to see him, madam," said Frith after a moment's hesitation. "I'm not quite sure what I ought to say. He's so very insistent about seeing Mr. De Winter." "Who is it?" I said. "Is it anyone you know?" Frith looked uncomfortable. "Yes, madam. It's a gentleman who used to come here frequently at one time when Mrs. De Winter was alive. A gentleman called Mr. Flavel." I knelt on the window seat and shut the window. The rain was coming down and was coming in on the cushions. Then I turned around and looked at Frith. "I think perhaps I had better see Mr. Flavel," I said. "Very good, madam." I went and stood on the rug beside the empty fireplace. It was just possible that I should be able to get rid of Flavel before Maxim comes back. I did not know what I was going to say to him, but I was not frightened. In a few moments, Frith returned and showed Flavel into the library. He looked much the same as before, but a little rougher, if possible, a little more untidy. He was the sort of man who invariably went hatless. His hair was bleached from the sun of the last days, and his skin was deeply tanned. His eyes were rather bloodshot, and I wondered if he had been drinking. "I'm afraid Maxim is not here," I said. "I don't know when he will be back. Wouldn't it be better if you made an appointment to see him at the office in the morning?" "Waiting doesn't worry me," said Flavel, "and I don't think I shall have to wait very long, you know. I had a look in on the dining room as I came along, and I see Max's place is laid for dinner all right." "Our plans have changed," I said. "It's quite possible Max won't be at home at all this evening." "Has run off, has he?" said Flavel with a half-smile I did not like. "Wonder if you really mean it. Of course, under the circumstances, it is the wisest thing he can do. Gossip is an unpleasant thing to some people. It's more pleasant to avoid it, isn't it?" "I don't know what you mean," I said. "Don't you? Oh, come. You don't expect me to believe that, do you? Tell me, are you feeling better? Too bad fainting like that at the inquest this afternoon. I would have come and helped you out, but I saw you had a one-night errand already." I bet Frank Crawley enjoyed himself. "Did you let him drive you home?" "You wouldn't let me drive you 5 yards when I offered to." "What do you want to see Maxim about?" I asked. Flavel leant forward on the table and helped himself to a cigarette. "You don't mind my smoking, I suppose? Wouldn't make you sick, will it? One never knows with brides." He watched me over his lighter. "Grown up a bit since I saw you last, haven't you?" he said. "I wonder what you've been doing, leading Frank Crawley up the garden path?" He blew a cloud of smoke into the air. "I say, do you mind asking old Frith to get me a whiskey and soda?" I did not say anything. I went and rang the bell. He sat down on the edge of the sofa, swinging his legs, that half-smile on his lips. Robert answered the bell. "A whiskey and soda for Mr. Flavel," I said. "Well, Robert," said Flavel, "I haven't seen you for a very long time. Still breaking the hearts of the girls in Carith?" Robert flushed. He glanced at me, horribly embarrassed. "All right, old chap. I won't give you away. Run along and get me a double whiskey and jump on it." Robert disappeared. Flavel laughed, dropping ash all over the floor. I took Robert out once on his half day, he said. Rebecca bet me a $5 I wouldn't ask him. Oh, I won my $5 all right. It's been one of the funniest evenings of my life. Did I laugh? Oh, boy. Robert on the razzle takes a lot of beatings, I tell you. I must say he's not a good eye for a girl. He picked the prettiest of the bunch we saw that night. Roberts came back again with a whiskey and soda on a tray. He still looked very red, very uncomfortable. Flavel watched him with a smile as he poured out his drink, and then he began to laugh, leaning back on the arm of the sofa. He whistled the bar of a song, watching Robert all the while. Was that the one, wasn't it? He said. That was the tune? You still like ginger hair, Robert? Robert gave him a flat, weak smile. He looked miserable. Flavel laughed louder still. Robert turned and went out the room. Poor kid. I don't suppose he's been on the loose since. That old ass Frith keeps him on a leading string. He began drinking his soda and his whiskey and soda, glancing around the room, looking at me every now and again, smiling. I don't think I shall mind very much if Maxim doesn't get to dinner. What say you? I did not answer. I stood by the fireplace, my hands behind my back. You wouldn't waste that place at the dining room table, would you? He looked at me, smiling still, his head to one side. Mr. Flavel, I don't want to be rude, but as a matter of fact, I'm very tired. I had a long and fairly exhausting day. If you can't tell me what you want to see Maxim about, it's not much good you're sitting here. You had better do as I suggest and go around to the estate office in the morning. He slid off the arm of the sofa and came towards me, his glass in his hand. No, he said. No, don't be a brute. I've had an exhausting day too. Don't run away and leave me. I'm quite harmless, really I am. I suppose Max has been telling tales about me to you. I did not answer. You think I'm the big bad wolf, don't you? He said. But I'm not, you know. I'm a perfectly ordinary, harmless bloke. And I think you are behaving splendidly over all this. Perfectly splendidly. I take off my hat to you, I really do. This last speech of his was very slurried and thick. I wish I had never told Frith I would see him. You come down here to Manderley, he said, waving his arm vaguely. You take on all this place, meet hundreds of people you've never seen before. You put up with old Max and his moods. Don't give a fig for anyone. You just go on your own way. I call it a damn good effort, and I don't care who hears me. A damn good effort. He swayed a little as he stood. He steadied himself and put the empty glass on the table. This business has been a shock to me, you know, he said. A bloody awful shock. Rebecca was my cousin. I was damn fond of her. Yes, I said, I am very sorry for you. We were brought up together, he went on. Always tremendous pals. Liked the same things, the same people. Laughed at the same jokes. I suppose I was fonder of Rebecca than anyone else in the world. And she... All this has been a bloody shock. Yes, I said, yes, of course. And what is Maxim going to do about it? That's what I want to know. Does he think he can sit back quietly now that sham inquest is over? Tell me that. He was not smiling anymore. He bent towards me. I am going to see justice is done to Rebecca, his voice growing louder. Suicide. God almighty, that doddering old fool of a coroner got the jury to say suicide. You and I know it wasn't suicide, don't we? He leant closer to me still. Don't we? He said slowly. The door opened and Maxim came into the room with Frank just behind him. Maxim stood quite still with the door open, staring at Flavel. What the hell are you doing here? He said. Flavel turned around, his hands in his pockets. He waited a moment and then he began to smile. As a matter of fact, Max, old chap, I came to congratulate you on the inquest this afternoon. Do you mind leaving this house? Said Max, or do you want Crawley and me to chuck you out? Steady a moment, said Flavel. He lit another cigarette and sat down once more on the arm of the sofa. You don't want Frith to hear what I'm going to say, do you? Well, he will if you don't shut that door. Max did not move. I saw Frank close the door very quietly. Now listen here, Max, said Flavel. You've come very well out of this affair, haven't you? Better than you ever expected. Oh, yes, I was in the court this afternoon, and I dare say you saw me. I was there from start to finish. I saw your wife faint at a rather critical moment, and I don't blame her. It was a touch to go then, wasn't it, Max, what the inquiry would do? And luckily for you, it went the way it did. You hadn't squared those thick-headed fellows who were acting jury, had you? Looked damn like it to me. Maxim made a move towards Flavel, but Flavel held up his head. Wait a bit, can't you? I haven't finished yet. You realize, don't you, Max, old man, that I can make things damned unpleasant for you if I choose? Not only unpleasant, but dare I say dangerous? I sat down on the chair beside the fireplace. I held the arms of the chair very tight. Frank came over and stood beside the chair. Still Maxim did not move. He never took his eyes off Flavel. Oh, yes, he said. In what way can you make things dangerous? Look here, Max, said Flavel. I suppose there are no secrets between you and your wife. From the looks of things, Crawley here just makes the happy trio. I can speak plainly then, and I will. You all know about Rebecca and me. We were lovers, weren't we? I never denied it. I never will. Very well, then. Up to the present, I believed, like every other fool, that Rebecca was drowned sailing in the bay and that her body was picked up at Edgecombe weeks after. It was a shock to me then, a bloody shock. But I said to myself, that's the sort of death Rebecca would choose. She'd go out like she lived, fighting. He paused and sat there on the edge of the sofa, looking at us all in turn. Then I picked up the evening paper a few days ago, and I read Rebecca's boat had been stumbled on by a local diver, and there was a body in the cabin. Couldn't understand it. Who the hell would Rebecca have as a sailing companion? Didn't make sense. Came down here and put up at a pub just outside of Carrick. I got in touch with Mrs. Danvers. She told me then that the body in the cabin was Rebecca's. Even so, I thought, like everyone else, that the first body was a mistake and Rebecca had somehow got shut in the cabin when she went to fetch a coat. Well, I attended that inquest today, as you know, and everything went smoothly, didn't it, until Tab gave his evidence. But after that, well, Max, old man, what have you got to say about those holes in the floorboards and those seacocks turned full on? Do you think, said Maxim slowly, that after those hours of talk this afternoon, I'm again with you? You heard the evidence. You heard the verdict. It satisfied the coroner, and it must satisfy you. Suicide, eh? Said Flavel. Rebecca committing suicide. The sort of thing she would do, wasn't it? Listen, you never knew I had this note, didn't you? I kept it because it was the last thing she ever wrote to me. I'll read it to you, and I think it will interest you. He took a piece of paper out of his pocket, and I recognized that thin, pointed, slanting hand. I tried to ring you from the flat, but could get no answer, he read. I'm going down to Manders right away. I shall be at the cottage this evening, and if you get this in time, will you get the car and follow me? I'll spend the night at the cottage and leave the door open for you. I've got something to tell you, and I want to see you as soon as possible. Rebecca. He put the note back in his pocket. That's not the sort of note you write when you're going to commit suicide, is it? He said. It was waiting for me at my flat when I got back at 4 a.m. I had no idea Rebecca was to be in London that day, or I should have gotten in touch with her. It happened by a vile stroke of fortune. I was on a party that night. When I read the note at 4 a.m, I decided it was too late to go crashing down on the 6-hour run to Manderley. I went to bed, determined to put a call through later in the day. I did, about 12 o'clock, and I heard Rebecca had been drowned. He sat there, staring at Maxim, and none of us spoke. Supposing the coroner this afternoon had read that note. Would have made it a little bit more tricky for you, wouldn't it, Max, old man? Well, said Maxim, why didn't you get up and give it to him? Steady, old boy, steady. No need to get rattled. I don't want to smash you, Max. God knows you've been a friend to me, but I don't bear malice about it. All married men with lovely wives are jealous, aren't they? And some of them just can't help playing Othello. They're made that way. I don't blame them. I'm sorry for them. I'm a bit of a socialist in my way, you know, and I can't think why fellows can't share their women instead of killing them. What difference does it make? You can get your fun just the same. A lovely woman isn't like a motor tire. She doesn't wear out. The more you use her, the better she goes. Now, Max, I've laid all my cards on the table. Why can't we come to an agreement? I'm not a rich man. Too fond of gambling for that. But what gets me down is never having any capital to fall back upon. Now, if I had a settlement of 2,000 or 3,000 a year for life, I could jog along quite comfortably, and I'd never trouble you again. I swear before God I would not. I've asked you before to leave the house, said Maxim. I'm not going to ask you again. There's the door behind me. You can open it yourself. Half a minute, Maxim, said Frank. It's not quite so easy as that. He turned to Flavel. I see what you're driving at. It happens, very unfortunately, that you could, as you say, twist things around and make it difficult for Maxim. I don't think he sees it clearly as I do. What is the exact amount you propose Maxim should settle on you? I saw Maxim go very white, and a little pulse began to show on his forehead. Don't interfere with this, Frank, he said. This is my affair entirely. I do not going to give way to blackmail. I don't suppose your wife wants to be pointed out as Mr. De Winter, the wife of a murderer, of a fellow who was hanged, said Flavel. He laughed and glanced toward me. You think you can frighten me, don't you, Flavel, said Maxim. Well, you're wrong. I'm not afraid of anything you can do. There's the telephone in the next room. Shall I ring up Colonel Julien and ask him to come over? He's the magistrate. He'll be interested in your story. Flavel stared at him and laughed. Good bluff, but it won't work. You wouldn't dare ring up old Julien. I've got enough evidence to hang you, Max, old man. Maxim walked slowly across the room and passed through the little room beyond. I heard the click of the telephone. Stop him, I said to Frank. Stop him, for God's sake. Frank glanced at my face. He went swiftly to the door. I heard Maxim's voice, very cool, very calm. I want Careth 17. Flavel was watching the door, his face curiously intense. Leave me alone, I heard Maxim say to Frank, and then 2 minutes afterwards, is that Colonel Julien speaking? It's De Winter here. Yes, I know. I wonder if you could possibly come over here at once. Yes, to Manderley. It's rather urgent. I can't explain why over the telephone, but you shall hear everything directly you come. I'm very sorry to drag you out. Yes. Thank you very much. Goodbye. He came back into the room. Julien is coming right away. He crossed over and threw open the windows. It was still raining very hard. He stood there with his back to us, breathing the cold air. Maxim, Frank said quietly. He did not answer. Flavel laughed and helped himself to another cigarette. If you want to hang yourself, old man, it's all the same to me. He picked up a paper from the table and flung himself down on the sofa, crossed his legs, and began to turn the pages. Frank hesitated, glancing from me to Maxim. Then he came beside me. Can't you do something? I whispered. Go out and meet Colonel Julien, prevent him from coming, say it was all a mistake? Maxim spoke from the window without turning around. Frank's not leaving this room. I'm going to manage this thing alone. Colonel Julien will be here in exactly 10 minutes. We said none of us anything. Flavel went on reading his paper. There was no sound but the steady falling rain. It fell without a break, steady, straight, and monotonous. I felt helpless, without strength. There was nothing I could do, nothing that Frank could do. In a book or a play, I would have found a revolver and we should have shot Flavel, hidden his body in a cupboard. There's no revolver. There's no cupboard. We were ordinary people. These things did not happen. I could not go to Maxim now and beg him on my knees to give Flavel the money. I had to sit there with my hands in my lap, watching the rain, watching Maxim with his back turned to me, standing by the window. It was raining too hard to hear the car. The sound of the rain covered all other sounds. We did not know Colonel Julian had arrived until the door opened and Frith showed him into the room. Maxim swung around from the window. "Good evening," he said. "We meet again. You've made very good time." "Yes," said Colonel Julian. "You said it was urgent, so I came at once. Luckily, my man had left the car handy. What an evening." He glanced at Flavel uncertainly and then came over and shook hands with him, nodding to Frank. "Good thing the rain has come," he said. "It's been hanging about too long. I hope you're feeling better." I murmured something, I don't know what, and he stood there looking from one of us to another, rubbing his hands. "I think you realize," Maxim said, "that I haven't brought you out in an evening like this for a social half-hour before dinner. This is Jack Flavel, my late wife's first cousin. I don't know if you have ever met." Colonel Julian nodded. "Your face seems familiar. I've probably met you here in the old days." "Quite," said Maxim. "Go ahead, Flavel." Flavel got up from the sofa and chucked the paper back on the table. The 10 minutes seemed to have sobered him. He walked quite steadily. He was not smiling any longer. And I had the impression he was not entirely pleased with the turn of the event, and he was ill-prepared for the encounter with Colonel Julian. He began speaking in a loud, rather domineering voice. "Look here, Colonel Julian, there's no sense in beating around the bush. The reason why I'm here is that I am not satisfied with the verdict given at the inquest this afternoon." "Oh," said Colonel Julian. "Isn't that for de Winter to say, not you?" "No, I don't think it is," said Flavel. "I have a right to speak not only as Rebecca's cousin, but as her prospective husband had she lived." Colonel Julian looked rather taken aback. "Oh," he said. "Oh, I see. That's rather different. Is this true, de Winter?" Max shrugged his shoulders. "It's the first I've heard of it," he said. Colonel Julian looked from one to the other doubtfully. "Look here, Flavel, what exactly is your trouble?" Flavel stared at him for a moment, and I could see he was planning something in his mind, and he was still not sober enough to carry it through. He put his hand slowly on his waistcoat pocket and brought out Rebecca's note. "This note was written a few hours before Rebecca was supposed to have set out on that suicidal sail. Here it is. I want you to read it and say whether you think a woman who wrote that note had made up her mind to kill herself." Colonel Julian took out a pair of spectacles from a case in his pocket and read the note. Then he handed it back to Flavel. "No," he said. "On the face of it, no. But I don't know what the note refers to. Perhaps you do, or perhaps Mr. de Winter does." Maxim did not say anything. Flavel twisted the piece of paper in his hands, considering Julian all the time. My cousin made a definite appointment in that note, didn't she?" he said. "She deliberately asked me to drive down to Manderley that night because she had something to tell me. What it exactly was, I don't suppose we shall ever know, but that's beside the point. She made the appointment, and she was to spend the night in the cottage on purpose to see me alone. The mere fact of her going for a sail never surprised me. It was the sort of thing she did for an hour or so after a long day in London. But to plug holes in the cabin and deliberately drown herself, the hysterical, impulsive freak of a neurotic girl? No, Colonel Julian, by Christ, no!" The color had flooded into his face, and the last words were shouted. His manner was not helpful to him, and I could see by the thin line of Colonel Julian's mouth that he had not taken to Flavel. "My dear fellow, it is not the slightest use your losing your temper with me. I am not the coroner who conducted the inquiry this afternoon, nor am I a member of the jury who gave the verdict. I am merely the magistrate of the district. Naturally, I want to help you all I can, and de Winter, too. You say you refuse to believe your cousin committed suicide. On the other hand, you heard, as we all did, the evidence of the boat builder. The seacocks were open, the holes were there. Very well, suppose we get to the point. What do you suppose really happened?" Flavel turned his head and looked slowly towards Maxim. He was still twisting the note between his fingers. Rebecca never opened those sea cocks, nor split the holes in the planking. Rebecca never committed suicide. You've asked for my opinion, and by God you shall have it. Rebecca was murdered. And if you want to know who the murderer is, why, there he stands by the window there with that goddamn superior smile you see on his face. He couldn't even wait, could he, until the year was out before marrying the first girl he set eyes on. There he is. There's your murderer for you, Mr. Maximilian de Winter. Take a good look at him. He'd look well hanging, wouldn't he? And Flavel began to laugh. The laugh high-pitched, forced, and foolish, and all the while twisting Rebecca's note between his fingers. Just when I think everything is solved, it is not. And we have one more piece of the puzzle sliding into place. Oof. I'm not really a big fan of Flavel, but he's got a point. You don't really send a note like that. Hey, I think I'm carrying your child, because we revealed during Max's story that she revealed that she was pregnant. Come see me, and then she's going to kill herself. So Flavel has a good point, even though he's not presenting it in the best way possible. I'm not sure if Flavel's going to make it, but we shall find out next time, because I know, Catherine, it was intense. I was thinking, how are we going to do? What's going to happen in the next 80 pages? Oh, a lot. A lot's going to happen, apparently. So I think that, like I said, I haven't read it, so I have to wait now. But I think some stuff's going to happen. I'm really excited. Thank you for joining. Rebecca, we have, only 40 pages. So we might actually, oh man. Oh, well, we might get 2 more. We'll see. We might be 1 more. It might be 2 more. We'll see. We'll see how next time goes. I hope you have a fantastic day. Happy spring, everyone. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Be safe out there. Bye.